At the corner of Liberty Street and Broadway stands an absence, a ghost haunting the monolithic black face of One Liberty Plaza. But for 60 years, something else commanded this sky. The Singer Tower, a Parisian cathedral of commerce thrust into the American sky. 47 stories of deep red brick, forest green copper, and a gilded lantern that held the clouds. It was, for a time, the tallest building on Earth. And then it earned a more tragic record, the tallest building ever deliberately erased, not by disaster, but by an accountant's ledger. The air is different here, at the corner of Liberty Street and Broadway, especially after midnight when the machinery of capital has finally gone quiet. It tastes of exhaust and the faint, metallic chill rolling off the harbor. But beneath that, there is something else, a phantom limb ache in the skyline. If you stand on the opposite curb and look up, you see only the unblinking, monolithic face of One Liberty Plaza, a black tombstone 54 stories high. It is a building of brutal efficiency, a monument to the spreadsheet, each square foot calculated for maximum return. It is solid, real, profitable. And yet, it is the absence it represents that truly defines this space. For 60 years, something else stood here, something that did more than occupy space. It sang. The Singer Building was not just a tower. It was an argument, rendered in 47 stories of deep red brick, forest green copper, and gold leaf. It was a Parisian fantasy thrusting itself into the American sky, a testament to a time when commerce still felt the need to be beautiful, to apologize for its ambition with grace. Now, it is a ghost, a collection of sepia photographs and mournful statistics. It held the title of the world's tallest building for less than a year, a fleeting, glorious reign. But its most significant record is one of profound tragedy. The tallest building ever to be peacefully, intentionally demolished. Not by fire, not by war, not by act of God, but by an act of accounting. It was erased from existence because the land it stood on was deemed more valuable than the history it contained. And so we are left here, in the cold shadow of its replacement, to ask the question that haunts the memory of this lost cathedral. In a city that worships the new, what is the cost of forgetting? What happens when a masterpiece becomes a liability? The story of the Singer Tower is more than an architectural biography. It is a cautionary tale about the corrosion of beauty by pragmatism, a somber reflection on the impermanence of even our grandest achievements, and a deep investigation into the moment a city decided a piece of its soul was no longer profitable. To understand the tower, you must first understand the year it was born, 1908. The air itself crackled with a new kind of energy, an intoxicating blend of industrial power, immigrant hope, and unrestrained ambition. The Gilded Age was not so much ending as it was consolidating, hardening its victories into steel and stone. The automobile was a noisy new toy on the city's cobblestone streets. The first flickering images were being projected in Nickelodeons, and the sky was the new frontier. For centuries, humanity had built outwards, but in Manhattan, an island hemmed in by water and reality, the only direction left to go was up. On the night the Singer Tower was officially illuminated, a collective gasp went through the city. Thousands gathered in the streets below, their faces tilted towards the heavens, washed in the incandescent glow of 3,000 light bulbs. It was a sight no one had ever seen before. From its solid, 12-story base, a slender, elegant shaft soared into the darkness, culminating not in a flat, modern roof, but in a magnificent lantern-top dome, a feature of almost Baroque extravagance. It was a proclamation. The building didn't just scrape the sky, it crowned it. It was the physical embodiment of American exceptionalism, a structure that seemed to say, "Look what we can do." It was a marvel of engineering, a triumph of logistics, but more than that, it was a work of art. The architect, Ernest Flagg, had imbued it with a Parisian sensibility, a level of detail and ornamentation that was almost decadent. The sweeping wrought iron balconies, the classical cartouches, the soaring arched windows of the lobby. It was a building designed to inspire awe, not just to house clerks and typewriters. It was a palace of commerce, and for a brief, shining moment, it was the tallest inhabited structure on the planet. The newspapers of the day struggled to find superlatives, calling it a starward-pointing spire, a landmark for ocean liners, a modern Tower of Babel, and in that last description, perhaps, lay an unconscious prophecy. For in its defiant beauty, in its sheer vertical hubris, the Singer Tower was challenging more than just architectural limits. It was challenging the future itself, daring it to create something better, something grander. It was a challenge that, in the ruthless logic of New York real estate, it was destined to lose. The building was a statement, but it was not making its own. It was a vessel, a voice for the colossal entity that paid for its existence, the Singer Manufacturing Company. At the turn of the 20th century, Singer wasn't just a company. It was an empire. Its sewing machines, elegant black-lacquered instruments of domestic industry, were in nearly every home from the prairies of Nebraska to the jungles of the Congo. The click and whir of the Singer treadle was the background music of global progress. The company had pioneered not just a product, but a system of worldwide distribution, credit, and marketing that was the envy of the industrial world. It was one of the very first multinational corporations, a titan of commerce whose influence was felt on every continent. But power, especially new power, is often accompanied by a deep-seated insecurity. It must be displayed, broadcast, solidified. It wasn't enough to have a balance sheet that staggered the imagination. The company needed a home that did the same. It needed a headquarters that was not merely large, but iconic. A building that would serve as the ultimate three-dimensional advertisement, a landmark so prominent it would be synonymous with the company's name. The decision to build the world's tallest building was not born of necessity, but of vanity. It was a branding exercise on an unprecedented scale, a marketing campaign waged with thousands of tons of steel and brick. The tower's silhouette was intended to be as recognizable as the golden S on the side of their machines. Every ship that sailed into New York Harbor would see it first, a welcoming beacon of American industry. Every postcard sent from the city would feature its distinctive form. It was to be the company's crown jewel, a physical manifestation of its global dominance, a permanent fixture in the world's most important city. The beauty of the tower, its elaborate Beaux-Arts filigree, was part of this strategy. This was not the brute force of a factory. It was the sophisticated elegance of a global leader. The message was clear. Singer was not just powerful. It was civilized. It was a patron of the arts, a builder of monuments, a force for beauty in the world. The tower was designed to be loved, to be admired, to become an inseparable part of the city's fabric. And in doing so, it would make the company that built it seem not just successful but eternal. The news, when it came in 1967, landed like a punch to the city's gut. The Singer Tower, that graceful Parisian needle on the skyline, was to be torn down. The initial reaction was disbelief, quickly followed by a wave of outrage. How could this be possible? Demolish a landmark? Demolish the former tallest building in the world? It seemed unthinkable, a barbaric act in a city that prided itself on its cultural sophistication. Preservation groups, architects, historians, and ordinary citizens rallied to its defense. The newly formed Landmarks Preservation Commission, a body created in the wake of the tragic demolition of the original Pennsylvania station just a few years earlier, scrambled to find a way to save it. But they were too late. The tower had been sold before the commission had the power to designate it as a landmark, a fatal gap in the city's legislative armor. The new owner, United States Steel, presented their case with the cold, irrefutable logic of a financial statement. The tower, they explained, was obsolete. Its interior floor plan was a nightmare for a modern corporation. The grand, marble-clad lobby was inefficient. The slender tower floors, which gave the building its signature elegance, were too small, offering only 4,000 square feet of usable space, a laughable figure by the standards of the mid-1960s. To renovate it would be prohibitively expensive. To leave it standing would be to forsake millions in potential revenue. The numbers were stark and unforgiving. The building, for all its history and beauty, was an economic failure. It simply didn't generate enough income to justify its existence on one of the most valuable pieces of real estate on Earth. The public debate that followed was a clash of two fundamentally different worldviews. On one side was the argument for memory, for aesthetics, for the city's architectural soul. On the other was the argument for progress, for efficiency, for the maximization of profit. It was a battle between the intangible value of history and the quantifiable value of a balance sheet. And in the bare-knuckle arena of New York City development, it was never a fair fight. The pleas to save the Singer Tower were dismissed as sentimental, as romantic nonsense that stood in the way of economic growth. The tower was a relic, a dinosaur. Its time had passed. A city, the developers argued, is a living organism, not a museum. It must be free to shed its old skin to make way for the new. The decision was final. The wrecking ball was coming. At the heart of this colossal undertaking was a man of immense wealth and equally immense ambition, Frederick Gilbert Bourne. He was not the founder of the Singer Company, but the man who had transformed it from a successful American business into a global behemoth. Bourne was a product of the Gilded Age, a man who moved in the highest circles of society, a commodore of the New York Yacht Club who built himself a sprawling, multi-million-dollar estate on Long Island. Yet, for all his success, he was an outsider in the rarefied world of old money. He had started as a clerk and worked his way up, marrying into the Singer family dynasty. This ascent left him with the perpetual need to prove himself, to solidify his place among the Astors and the Vanderbilts not just with wealth, but with legacy. The Singer Tower was to be that legacy. It was more than a corporate headquarters. It was his personal monument, a physical manifestation of his own towering ambition. He envisioned a building that would not only represent the power of his company but would also secure his own name in the annals of history. It was an act of architectural bravado, a declaration that he, Frederick Bourne, had arrived. He poured his own energy and a significant portion of the company's vast resources into the project, overseeing every detail. He chose the architect, his own brother-in-law Ernest Flagg, ensuring a level of personal control over the vision. He wanted a building that was not just tall but perfect. He demanded the finest materials: mahogany from the West Indies, marble from the quarries of Italy and France, bronze fittings cast by the city's best artisans. The building was a reflection of his own taste, which leaned towards the ornate, the classical, the European. He was not interested in the stark functionalism that was beginning to emerge in Chicago. He wanted opulence, a grandeur that spoke of established power and refined culture. In many ways, the tower was a fortress against his own insecurities. Its solid masonry, its soaring height, its extravagant detail, it was all designed to project an image of unshakable permanence in a rapidly changing world. It was a way of carving his identity into the very bedrock of Manhattan. He could not have known that the same forces of change he sought to defy would eventually render his masterpiece obsolete. For a man obsessed with legacy, there can be no greater irony than to be remembered primarily for creating the most magnificent structure ever willingly destroyed. The Singer Manufacturing Company in 1908 was a machine of incredible complexity and reach, and it demanded a headquarters that could function as its central nervous system. The decision to build a skyscraper was therefore not just about ego, but also about the practical need for consolidation. For years, the company's administrative offices had been scattered across several buildings in Lower Manhattan. Bringing them all under one roof was a matter of efficiency. The new building would be a self-contained city, a vertical factory for processing the paperwork that fueled a global empire. The design of the building reflected this corporate logic. The grand 12-story base was the workhorse, containing the vast open-plan floors where hundreds of clerks, stenographers, and accountants would toil in anonymity. These were the gears of the machine, the invisible army processing orders from sales agents in Moscow, managing supply chains from factories in Scotland, and calculating profits from plantations in the South Pacific. Above this sprawling base rose the tower, the exclusive domain of the company's elite. Here, in lavishly appointed offices with sweeping views of the harbor, the executives would make the decisions that shaped the company's destiny. The tower was the brain, insulated from the noise and grime of the city below, a sanctuary of power where global strategy was conceived. This physical separation of management from labor was a clear architectural expression of the corporate hierarchy. The building was a diagram of power, its very structure reinforcing the social and economic divisions of the era. Furthermore, the tower was a marvel of modern technology, designed to impress not just with its beauty, but with its cutting-edge functionality. It was equipped with a fleet of high-speed hydraulic elevators, a sophisticated internal communication system, and its own power generation plant in the subbasement. It even had a central vacuum cleaning system and an advanced pneumatic tube network for whisking documents between floors. Every detail was designed to project an image of a company on the vanguard of progress, a perfectly rational and efficient organization. The Singer Tower was therefore a dual entity. It was a romantic, Beaux-Arts fantasy on the outside, but a ruthlessly efficient engine of commerce on the inside. It was a place where art and industry, aesthetics and economics were fused together in a single, audacious statement. It was the perfect symbol for a company that sold a product of domestic utility by wrapping it in an aura of elegance and aspiration. The man tasked with translating this complex corporate vision into physical form was Ernest Flagg, a figure who complicates the narrative of the Singer Tower. Flagg was not a corporate sycophant or a mere functionary. He was a highly respected architect, trained at the prestigious École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, the crucible of classical architectural theory. He was a scholar and a reformer, deeply concerned with the social responsibilities of his profession. He wrote extensively about the need for urban planning, for zoning laws that would prevent the city from becoming a dark, airless canyon of oversized buildings. He was a passionate advocate for designs that prioritized light and air, believing that a healthy building led to a healthy society. His personal connection to the project, Singer President Frederick Bourne was his brother-in-law, gave him a unique position of influence, but also placed him in a state of inherent conflict. His personal design philosophy seemed at odds with the client's desire for the tallest building in the world, an act that, by its very nature, would cast a long shadow over its neighbors. Flagg attempted to resolve this contradiction through his design. He argued that a tower should only be allowed to occupy a quarter of its lot, ensuring that a tower of light would rise from a lower base, preserving sunlight and airflow for the surrounding streets. The Singer Tower was the built manifestation of this theory. The slender, elegant shaft rises from a much larger 12-story block, a compromise between the client's desire for height and the architect's commitment to urban-minded principles. Within the building, his ideals are also evident. The large windows, the relatively shallow depth of the office floors, and the central light court were all designed to maximize natural illumination for the workers inside. Flagg brought his Parisian training to bear on every detail, from the grand, theatrical sweep of the lobby's marble staircase to the delicate wrought iron tracery on the balconies. He saw the project as an opportunity to demonstrate that a commercial building could also be a major civic monument, a work of public art that would ennoble the city. Yet, he was ultimately serving a corporate master. The building's opulence, its record-breaking height, were driven by the ego of his client and the branding needs of the company. Was Flagg a willing collaborator in this act of corporate hubris? Or did he see himself as a civilizing influence, shaping a purely commercial impulse into something of lasting artistic value? The Singer Tower stands as a monument to this unresolved tension, a masterpiece born from the complicated marriage of an artist's ideals and a capitalist's ambition. The drive to build the Singer Tower cannot be understood in isolation. It was a product of a specific moment in New York's history, a feverish period of architectural one-upmanship that has come to be known as the First Skyscraper War. At the turn of the century, the skyline of Manhattan became a battleground for the city's most powerful corporations and wealthiest individuals. Height was the ultimate measure of prestige, and the title of world's tallest building was a trophy coveted above all others. This was a war fought not with armies, but with architects and engineers with blueprints and bank loans. The weapons were steel frames, high-speed elevators, and pneumatic caissons. Each new project was a direct challenge to the last, a continuous, escalating race into the clouds. Before Singer, the record was held by the Park Row building, a respectable 30 stories. But the ambition was growing exponentially. As Singer's steel skeleton began to rise, another contender was already being planned just a few blocks away, the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company Tower. The race was on. Singer's president, Frederick Bourne, and its architect, Ernest Flagg, were acutely aware of the competition. Their initial plans were for a more modest 35-story tower, but as news of MetLife's ambitions spread, the plans for the Singer Tower were revised, stretched, and pushed ever higher. 41 stories became 47. The height was increased to 612 feet, a number carefully calculated to eclipse any known rival. This obsession with height was about more than just bragging rights. It was a potent symbol of American power and technological prowess. In an age without television or internet, the skyline was the most powerful medium of mass communication. A record-breaking building was a message broadcast to the entire world, a declaration of a company's and a nation's dominance. The psychological impact on the public was immense. People would gather to watch these steel behemoths take shape, marveling at the audacity of their creators. The skyscraper became a symbol of modernity itself, of humanity's ability to conquer nature and reshape the world in its own image. The Singer Tower was born of this competitive frenzy. Its elegant design and Parisian flair distinguished it from its rivals, but at its core, it was a weapon in an ongoing war for supremacy. It was built to be the king of the mountain. That its reign would last for only a matter of months before the MetLife Tower surpassed it speaks to the ferocious pace of this architectural arms race. The glory was fleeting, but the impulse that drove its creation, the primal human urge to build higher, to reach further, to leave an indelible mark, was a force that would continue to shape the city for the next century. Long before the first brick was laid, the true work began deep within the earth. The foundation of a skyscraper in Manhattan is a battle waged against the island's very geology. To support the immense weight of the planned tower, estimated at over 18,000 tons, the foundations had to be sunk not into soil or clay, but down to the solid bedrock of Manhattan schist, in some places over 90 feet below street level. The technology for this arduous task was as brutal as it was ingenious. The pneumatic caisson. These were massive, airtight steel boxes, open at the bottom, which were slowly lowered into the ground. Inside these chambers, compressed air was pumped in to hold back the mud, water, and sand, allowing men, known as sandhogs, to excavate the earth by hand. The work was hellish. The men labored in shifts within the cramped, dimly lit boxes, the air thick with humidity and the constant, deafening hiss of the compressors. They dug with shovels and pickaxes, loading the debris into buckets that were hoisted to the surface. But the greatest danger was the pressure itself. To keep the water out at such depths, the air pressure inside the caisson had to be immense, sometimes more than 40 pounds per square inch. This exposed the workers to the constant threat of the Benz, or caisson disease, a painful and often fatal condition caused by nitrogen bubbles forming in the bloodstream during decompression. The transition from the high-pressure environment of the caisson back to the surface was a perilous one, done through a series of airlocks. A miscalculation, a moment of haste, could lead to crippling joint pain, paralysis, or death. The sandhogs were the invisible, unsung heroes of the skyscraper age. They were often recent immigrants, men who were willing to risk their lives for a few dollars a day. Their labor was the true bedrock upon which the city's ambition was built. For every foot of elegant tower that would eventually grace the skyline, a corresponding price was paid in sweat, in fear, and sometimes in blood, deep within the dark, pressurized caverns beneath the city streets. The gleaming marble lobby and the mahogany-paneled boardrooms of the Singer Tower would rest upon this foundation of unseen, perilous human toil. It was the first and most stark illustration of the building's inherent contradiction. A soaring monument to civilized commerce, built upon a foundation of brute, primal struggle. Once the foundations were set, the city was treated to a new kind of spectacle, the rise of the steel skeleton. This was architecture as performance art, a daily drama of daring and precision played out hundreds of feet in the air. The girders and beams, forged in the foundries of Pennsylvania, arrived in the city on barges and were carted through the crowded streets to the construction site. There, steam-powered derricks would hoist the multi-ton pieces of steel into the sky, where they were guided into place by teams of construction workers. The most iconic of these workers were the riveters. They worked in gangs of four: a heater, a catcher, a bucker-up, and a driver. The heater would pull a cherry-red rivet from a small, portable forge and toss it, sometimes across a gap of 50 or 60 feet, to the catcher, who would snag it out of the air in a metal cone. The catcher would then place the rivet into the hole in the steel beams, where the bucker-up would hold it in place with a heavy dolly bar. On the other side, the driver, armed with a pneumatic riveting gun, would hammer the molten end of the rivet into a smooth, tight head, a percussive blast that became the signature soundtrack of the city's growth. This entire sequence was performed in a matter of seconds, repeated thousands upon thousands of times, often while balanced precariously on a narrow beam with nothing but empty space below. These skyboys, as they were called, became figures of urban legend, celebrated for their nonchalant bravery and acrobatic grace. They were a new breed of American folk hero, symbols of the nation's fearless, can-do spirit. But the romance of the image belied a brutal reality. The work was incredibly dangerous. A misstep, a moment of distraction, a gust of wind could be fatal. There were no safety nets, no harnesses. The noise from the riveting guns was deafening, leading to permanent hearing loss. The work was exhausting, physically demanding, and the pay, while good for the time, hardly compensated for the daily risks. The construction of the Singer Tower was a testament to their skill and courage. They were the ones who pieced together the bones of the giant, bolting the dream of Frederick Bourne and Ernest Flagg into a tangible reality, one red-hot rivet at a time. The finished building, clad in its elegant brick and terracotta skin, would hide this raw, steel skeleton from view. But it was there, the strong, silent framework that bore the weight of all the ambition, all the beauty, and all the commerce that the tower was built to contain. Within the completed walls of the Singer Tower, a rigid social and spatial hierarchy was immediately established. The building was not a homogeneous space, but a carefully stratified world, a perfect microcosm of the class structure of the Gilded Age. Its layout was a physical map of power and privilege. The journey began in the lobby, a quasi-public space designed to overwhelm the senses and impress the visitor. It was a soaring, three-story atrium of marble and bronze, capped with a domed, stained-glass skylight. This was the building's grand entrance hall, its theater of commerce. From here, one could access the main Singer sewing machine showroom, a temple to the company's primary product, where the machines were displayed like jewels in a gallery. But this opulent ground floor was merely the prelude. The true division lay between the base and the tower. The first 12 floors, the building's broad shoulders, housed the rank and file. These were vast, open floors filled with row upon row of identical desks, a sea of clerical workers performing the repetitive, essential tasks of a global corporation. Here, under the watchful eyes of floor managers, hundreds of men and women labored in a world of ledgers, typewriters, and filing cabinets. It was a space designed for efficiency and surveillance, where individuality was submerged in the collective effort. The journey to the upper echelons required a transfer to a separate bank of elevators, a subtle but significant transition. These express cars whisked executives past the clerical floors directly to the exclusive realm of the tower. Here, the atmosphere changed completely. The open-plan floors gave way to a labyrinth of private offices, richly appointed with thick carpets, mahogany paneling, and private lavatories. The higher one ascended, the more rarefied the air became. The corner offices belonged to the senior vice presidents, and at the very apex, in a circular chamber directly beneath the building's gleaming lantern, was the boardroom. This was the sanctum sanctorum, a circular room offering a 360-degree panorama of the city and the world beyond. It was from this godlike vantage point that the company's directors would survey their domain and chart its future. This stark upstairs/downstairs dynamic defined the daily life of the building, a constant, physical reminder to every employee of their precise place in the corporate machine. The Singer Tower was a monument to wealth, but it was also a creature of it. Its very existence was predicated on a staggering financial investment, and from the moment it was conceived, it was bound by the unforgiving laws of economics. The final cost of construction was approximately $13.5 million, an astronomical sum in 1908, equivalent to well over $400 million today. This figure represented a colossal gamble by the Singer Company, a massive diversion of capital from its core business of manufacturing into the speculative world of real estate. The ledger books from the period tell a story not of artistic vision, but of immense material flows. Entries for thousands of tons of structural steel, millions of bricks, acres of marble, and countless barrels of cement. The payrolls for the hundreds of sandhogs, riveters, masons, and artisans who toiled for 2 years to bring the structure to life. The bills kept coming, a relentless tide of expenses that underscored the enormous risk of the project. To justify this expenditure, the building had to perform. It had to generate revenue, not just from the space occupied by the Singer Company itself, but from the floors it would lease to other tenants. The financial success of the tower depended on its ability to attract high-paying corporate clients, to become a prestigious address that businesses would compete to occupy. In its early years, this was not a problem. As the world's tallest and one of its most beautiful buildings, it was an instant sensation. But this success sowed the seeds of its own destruction. The tower's design, with its slender profile and relatively small floor plates, was a key part of its aesthetic appeal. But from a purely financial perspective, it was inefficient. Every square foot dedicated to a soaring lobby, a wide corridor, or a decorative balcony was a square foot that could not be leased. The ratio of rentable space to total volume was a weakness lurking within its beautiful form. The bills for maintenance, for heating, for the army of staff required to operate the building were constant. The tower was a hungry beast, constantly needing to be fed by rental income. For the first few decades, the prestige of the address was enough to offset its spatial inefficiencies. But as the city grew, as architectural tastes changed, and as new, larger, more efficient buildings were constructed, the Singer Tower's economic foundation began to erode. It was a creature of the Gilded Age, and it would struggle to survive in the more pragmatic, cost-conscious world that was to come. For a short, brilliant period, the Singer Tower fulfilled every ambition of its creators. It was the undisputed queen of the New York skyline, a symbol of the city's glamour and power recognized around the world. Its observation deck, perched 550 feet above the pavement, became one of the city's premier tourist attractions. For the price of 50 cents, visitors could ride the high-speed elevators to the 42nd floor and step out onto a balcony to witness a view that had previously been the exclusive domain of the birds. The panorama was breathtaking. To the south, the Statue of Liberty and the great ships steaming into the harbor. To the north, the growing forest of skyscrapers marching up the spine of Manhattan. It was a perspective that changed people's relationship with the city, allowing them to comprehend its scale and complexity in a single, awe-inspiring glance. The tower became a celebrity in its own right. It was featured on countless postcards, in newspaper illustrations, and in the background of early silent films. It was the definitive landmark of Lower Manhattan, a fixed point of reference in a city of constant flux. For the Singer Company, the tower was a marketing triumph. The brand was now inextricably linked with this iconic structure, lending it an aura of sophistication, modernity, and unshakable stability. The building hosted foreign dignitaries, celebrated aviators, and titans of industry, its lavish interiors providing a suitably impressive backdrop for the workings of global capitalism. This was the golden age, the moment when the immense financial gamble seemed to have paid off, when the vision of Frederick Bourne and Ernest Flagg was fully and gloriously realized. The tower was more than just an office building. It had become part of the city's identity, a source of civic pride. It seemed as permanent and indestructible as the island bedrock upon which it stood. But this sense of permanence was an illusion. The very forces of competition and technological progress that the tower celebrated were already conspiring to render it obsolete. The Golden Age was destined to be fleeting, a brief moment of perfect alignment before the world changed and the slow, inexorable process of decline began. The first blow to the Singer Tower's prestige came just a year after its completion. In 1909, the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company completed its own tower on Madison Square, soaring to 700 feet and decisively snatching the title of the world's tallest building. Suddenly, Singer was second best. While it retained its reputation for elegance, its primary claim to fame had been lost. This was only the beginning. The skyscraper war it had helped to escalate continued with relentless ferocity. In 1913, the magnificent Gothic spire of the Woolworth Building rose downtown, a cathedral of commerce that surpassed MetLife and captured the public's imagination with its scale and beauty. By the 1930s, the Art Deco giants of Midtown, the Chrysler Building and the Empire State Building, had pushed the record for height to levels that made the Singer Tower seem almost quaint by comparison. But the more profound threat was not one of height, but of style and function. The architectural world was undergoing a seismic shift. The ornate, historicist language of the Beaux-Arts, with its classical detailing and rich ornamentation, began to fall out of fashion. A new philosophy was taking hold, one that championed clean lines, functionalism, and the honest expression of structure. The rise of the international style, with its glass curtain walls and unadorned, box-like forms, represented a complete rejection of everything the Singer Tower stood for. It was now seen by a new generation of architects and critics as a relic of a bygone era, a fussy, over-decorated antique. This change in taste was mirrored by a change in business practice. The modern corporation of the mid-20th century required vast, open, and flexible office spaces. They needed large, contiguous floors that could be easily reconfigured to accommodate changing departments and workflows. The Singer Tower, with its slender profile and small, somewhat awkward floor plates, was the antithesis of this new ideal. Its greatest aesthetic strength, its elegant, narrow shaft, had become its greatest commercial liability. The very features that Ernest Flagg had designed to bring in light and air were now seen as hopelessly inefficient. The world had changed around the Singer Tower, leaving it stranded in time, a beautiful but impractical artifact from a more romantic, less pragmatic age. The economic shocks of the 20th century further hastened the tower's decline. The Great Depression of the 1930s was a body blow to the commercial real estate market in New York. As businesses failed and unemployment soared, vast swathes of office space across the city sat empty. The Singer Tower, with its high maintenance costs and increasingly outdated layout, struggled to compete for the few remaining tenants. The prestige of the address was no longer enough to overcome its practical shortcomings. The building, once a symbol of vibrant capitalism, now bore witness to its near collapse. The gleaming brass and marble of its lobby echoed with a new kind of emptiness. The Singer Company itself was facing its own challenges, navigating the treacherous waters of a global economic crisis. The tower, once a proud symbol of their success, was becoming a significant financial drain, a massive fixed cost in an era of dwindling revenues. The Second World War brought a temporary reprieve, as the demand for office space in the city surged to support the war effort. But the underlying problems remained. After the war, a new building boom transformed the city, particularly in Midtown Manhattan. A new generation of sleek, air-conditioned office towers rose, offering the large, modern floor plates that corporations now demanded. Companies began to abandon the aging, cramped buildings of the financial district for these new, more efficient spaces. The Singer Tower found itself in a declining neighborhood, competing with a new and superior product. The gilt was flaking, the advanced systems of 1908 were now antiquated, and the cost of modernization was prohibitive. The building was becoming a trap. Its unique design made it impossible to adapt to the new realities of the office market. It was too beautiful to be ignored, but too impractical to be profitable. The very qualities that made it a landmark were the same qualities that sealed its fate. The building that was built as a monument to permanence was now facing the prospect of its own extinction, not at the hands of a natural disaster, but through the slow, grinding erosion of economic obsolescence. The final act in the life of the Singer Tower began in the 1960s. The Singer Company, having long since moved its primary operations out of the building, decided to sell its famous but now burdensome headquarters. The property was acquired by United States Steel, who intended to demolish the existing structures on the block to make way for a new, much larger corporate headquarters. This was the moment the tower's fate was sealed. The decision was not made out of malice or a lack of appreciation for the building's beauty, but was the result of a cold, dispassionate financial calculation. The key factor was a concept central to New York real estate: floor area ratio, or FAR. This zoning regulation dictates the maximum amount of floor space a developer is allowed to build on a given piece of land. The Singer Tower, with its slender profile and adherence to Ernest Flagg's Tower of Light principle, utilized only a fraction of the total square footage permitted on its site. The building contained approximately 410,000 square feet of office space. A new tower, built to the maximum allowable FAR, could contain over 1.6 million square feet on the same plot of land. The economic logic was brutal and inescapable. The land upon which the Singer Tower stood was worth far more empty than it was with the building on it. The structure itself had become a negative asset, an obstacle preventing the land from being developed to its most profitable potential. When the plans for the new U.S. Steel building, which would eventually be known as One Liberty Plaza, were unveiled, the contrast was shocking. It was to be a massive, slab-like black box, a 54-story monolith of dark steel and glass that would fill the entire block, rising straight up from the property line without setbacks. It was the architectural embodiment of the spreadsheet, a building designed for maximum volume and efficiency, with no concessions to elegance, ornamentation, or the public realm. It was the perfect antithesis of the Singer Tower. The battle for the tower's preservation was thus a battle against this inexorable financial logic. Proponents argued that some things should be beyond price, that a city's heritage could not be measured in rentable square feet. But in the end, the numbers won. The illusion of the tower's permanence, so carefully crafted by its creators, was shattered by the simple, hard reality of its balance sheet. The trap had been built 60 years earlier, not with steel and stone, but with a design that prioritized beauty over bulk. The demolition of the Singer Tower began in the autumn of 1967 and lasted for nearly a year. It was not a swift, explosive affair, but a slow, methodical, and profoundly sad deconstruction. It was a public execution, carried out in plain sight, a piece-by-piece dismantling of a masterpiece. A wrecking ball, a tool of brute force, was the lead instrument in this symphony of destruction. The first impacts were the most jarring. The heavy iron ball swung into the ornate dormers and carved cartouches of the mansard roof, shattering the intricate terracotta and sending cascades of red brick tumbling to the streets below. The sound echoed through the canyons of Wall Street, a percussive death knell for an era. Day by day, the tower was unbuilt. Crews of demolition workers swarmed over the structure, using cutting torches to sever the steel beams that had been so heroically riveted together 60 years before. The elegant brick and stone facade was peeled away, exposing the raw skeleton within. The building that had once soared with such confidence was gradually brought down to earth, reduced to a pile of rubble and twisted metal. For New Yorkers, it was a painful spectacle. People would stop on their way to work to watch the slow-motion destruction, a mixture of morbid curiosity and genuine grief on their faces. It felt like a violation, an act of civic self-harm. The demolition was meticulously documented by photographers and filmmakers, their images capturing the tragic beauty of the process. The silhouette of a lone worker against the sky on a half-demolished floor, the delicate tracery of a wrought iron balcony being wrenched from its moorings, the final, pathetic stump of the once mighty tower. The building did not go quietly. Its robust construction, a testament to the quality of its materials and the skill of its builders, made it incredibly difficult to take apart. What had taken 2 years to build took nearly a year to destroy. But the outcome was never in doubt. The rubble was carted away on barges and unceremoniously dumped in the landfill of the Meadowlands in New Jersey. The final destination for the glorious Beaux-Arts Palace was a marshy, industrial wasteland. The space it once occupied was now just a hole in the ground, a gaping wound in the heart of the financial district. The destruction of the Singer Tower left a void in the city, not just in its skyline, but in its conscience. The public outcry over its loss, though it came too late to save the building itself, coalesced into a powerful new force in urban life: the modern preservation movement. The demolition, following so closely on the heels of the loss of Pennsylvania Station, was a wake-up call. It was a stark demonstration that in New York, nothing was sacred, that even the most beloved and significant landmarks were vulnerable to the wrecking ball if they stood in the way of profit. This realization galvanized a generation of activists, architects, historians, and ordinary citizens. They understood that if the city's architectural heritage was to survive, it needed a stronger shield than public sentiment alone. It needed the force of law. The Landmarks Preservation Commission, which had been powerless to stop the Singer demolition, was strengthened and given more authority. The process for designating landmarks was streamlined, and the legal protections afforded to them were enhanced. The ghost of the Singer Tower began to haunt the boardrooms of developers and the halls of city government. Its memory became a powerful argument. A cautionary tale invoked time and again in the fights to save other historic buildings. Grand Central Terminal, the Jefferson Market Courthouse, the historic cast-iron buildings of Soho. The successful preservation of these and countless other landmarks in the following decades owes a direct debt to the sacrifice of the Singer Tower. In this sense, the building achieved in death a kind of influence it never had in life. It became a martyr for the cause of preservation. Its most enduring legacy is not the memory of its elegant form, but the invisible web of legal protections that now safeguards the city's architectural treasures. It taught New York a painful but necessary lesson, that a city that erases its past risks losing its soul. The Singer Tower had to disappear so that other great buildings might live. This invisible legacy is a profound irony, a monument to permanence that had to be destroyed to make the cause of permanence itself more permanent. In 1974, a new building opened on the site where the Singer Tower had stood. One Liberty Plaza, designed by the architectural firm Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, was the physical embodiment of the new corporate modernism. It is a sheer, 54-story black slab, a work of uncompromising, almost aggressive simplicity. Its facade is a relentless grid of dark glass windows and black-painted steel, rising vertically from the street without any setbacks or ornamentation. There is no grand entrance, no soaring lobby, no detail to delight the eye. It is a building conceived as a pure container for rentable square footage, an exercise in maximizing volume and minimizing cost. It is, in every conceivable way, the philosophical opposite of its predecessor. Where the Singer Tower was specific, bespoke, and articulated, One Liberty Plaza is generic, anonymous, and mute. Where Singer was clad in the warm, tactile materials of brick and stone, One Liberty is sheathed in a cold, reflective skin of metal and glass. Where Singer sought to engage the public with its street-level showroom and observation deck, One Liberty turns a blank, forbidding face to the sidewalk. The building is a monument to the very forces that destroyed the Singer Tower. It is the triumph of the spreadsheet over the sketchbook, of floor area ratio over artistic expression. It is a tombstone, marking the grave of a different set of values. Standing at its base and looking up, one feels none of the awe or affection that the Singer Tower inspired. Instead, one feels a sense of anonymous, overwhelming power. It is a building that does its job efficiently, housing thousands of workers and generating millions in revenue. But it does not lift the spirit. It does not sing. Its presence on the site is a constant, stark reminder of the choice the city made. It is the price of progress, rendered in 54 stories of black steel. The contrast between the memory of what was lost and the reality of what replaced it is perhaps the most eloquent and tragic part of the Singer Tower story. The site is not empty, but it is haunted by an absence far more powerful than the structure that now occupies it. We are left, then, standing on this corner, in the shadow of a black box, contemplating a ghost. The story of the Singer Tower is more than the tale of a single building. It is a mirror, reflecting the enduring conflict at the heart of the American city. The struggle between culture and commerce, between memory and ambition, between the things we value and the things we price. The tower was born of hubris, the belief that a corporation could achieve immortality through architecture, that it could carve its name into the sky so deeply it would never be erased. Frederick Bourne and the Singer Company built a fortress of beauty, believing it could withstand the relentless tide of change. But they failed to understand that the economic forces they themselves championed would eventually turn on their creation. The building was a masterpiece of a particular moment, and when that moment passed, it was condemned as obsolete. Its destruction teaches us a sobering lesson about the nature of permanence. In a city like New York, the only constant is change. The ground beneath our feet is not solid, but is in a perpetual state of demolition and rebirth. But the story also offers a glimmer of hope. The tower's physical form is gone, but its story endures, perhaps more powerfully now than when it stood. It has become a potent symbol, a myth that forces us to question our own values. What do we choose to save? What are we willing to sacrifice for the sake of efficiency and profit? The ghost of the Singer Tower whispers that some things, once lost, can never be replaced. It reminds us that a city's skyline is not just a collection of assets on a balance sheet, but a repository of our collective memory, our aspirations, and our identity. The tower is gone, but the questions it raises remain, etched into the air at the corner of Liberty and Broadway, a permanent and unsettling presence in the life of the city it once so beautifully crowned.